On November 11th, Goodreads released their nominees for the 2025 Choice Awards, and there are not only one, but two YA categories this year. There is young adult fantasy and sci-fi, as well as young adult fiction. Unfortunately, in 2023, Goodreads did remove their children's and middle grade categories from the Choice Awards, which did cause some well-deserved backlash. And that same year, a petition was started to restore those categories. However, still 2 years later, Goodreads has not. But in hopes of supporting the YA categories, I wanted to go ahead and make this video to discuss who I'm voting for, who I think will make it into the top 10 nominees, as well as who I am predicting to be this year's winners. I am recording this video on November 22nd, and the first round of voting ends tomorrow, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed that my nominations will make it to the semifinals. And the semifinal rounds begin on November 25th and they end on November 30th, with the final winners being announced on December 4th. So let's start with the reader's choice for the young adult fiction and sci-fi categories with their 20 nominations. I have to admit that I have not read a single book on this nomination list. However, 3 of the books are currently on my TBR. That includes Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, Oathbound by Tracy Dion, and The Floating World by Axio. I have also heard of Watch Me by Tahiti Mafi, and it looks like she's got a second nomination, which is really interesting because that means she released both books in 2025, and I am always in awe of authors who can release multiple books in the same year. And I do love this cover of Zhao's book, Heavenly Tyrant. I'm going to quickly add that to my TBR because the cover is so lovely, and a part of me does wish that I read more fantasy just because the covers are so intricate and aesthetic. And I also think that this Rose Bargain cover is really lovely, and this Immortal Consequences is also really lovely, and I also really like the title of Language of Dragons. And I've also watched a bunch of videos of Fearless by Lauren Roberts. But other than that, the rest of the books and the authors are unfamiliar to me. I am not a fantasy and science fiction girly, so it's actually my fault that I don't have a good grasp on this category. So out of these 20 books, I'm going to choose my top 10. And again, I haven't read any of them, but I try to pay attention to what's trending, and I do watch a ton of book reviews. So let's just say that my top 10 are my subjective predictions that are based on my own made-up algorithm. So in no particular order, I am going to start off by choosing the Rose Bargain because the cover is so beautiful. I am also going to choose Fearless because I've heard so many things about it. I am also going to choose, of course, Sunrise on the Reaping, as well as The Floating World. I also think that I'm also going to choose Watch Me just because I also know how popular of an author she is and how well loved this book is. I am also going to choose Heavenly Tyrant because the cover is just too beautiful to pass up. I also really love this cover for Never Ever After, and as a result, I'm also going to choose it as a part of the top 10. And then, of course, I am going to choose Oathbound because it is on my TBR and I have watched so many reviews about it. I am also going to choose Wings of Starlight because it is very much giving Tinkerbell and the cover is absolutely beautiful. And then last but not least, I'm going to choose The House of Saphir because I also know that that book is really well loved in some of the book review spaces that I am a part of. With the final winner being Sunrise on the Reaping. However, my vote goes to Oathbound because it is November-y, and hopefully voting for it now will actually help me be able to move it closer to the top of my TBR list. Okay, so let's move now into YA fiction. And again, I'm going to admit that I have not read any of these books either. However, I am much more familiar with these titles and these authors because I do read a lot of YA contemporary as well as YA romance. Of course, Lynn Painter is the queen of romance, and I'm sad to say that I have yet to read any of her works, but Better Than the Movies is on my TBR, and it has non-stopped been checked out at my local library. But I am hoping that in 2026, I will finally be able to get my hands on a Lynn Painter book. I have seen And They Were Roommates pop up on my social media feed. I, of course, love Anne Liang. I Hope This Doesn't Find You is actually one of my top reads of last year, and I will link that video in the description box below. I am interested in reading this book as well. I do really like magical realism, and I also heard that it has really great character development. And I know nothing about Under the Same Stars, but I am going to go ahead and add it to my TBR because I really do like historical fiction. So I do know of Angeline Bowley because Firekeeper's Daughter is actually currently on my TBR, but I can't tell if this is the sequel. No, this is not the sequel, so I'm just going to go ahead and add it to my TBR as well. And then, of course, I do know of Needy Little Things. I've read some reviews about it. I do love the cover, so I'm also going to be adding it to my TBR as well. Glorious Rivals is very much giving me Mardi Gras vibes. And then Wish You Were Here has also popped up on my feed, although I don't know much about the novel or the author. Book Lovers meets Notting Hill with A Slice of You Got Mail and Wish You Were Here. So that sounds very, very cute. Falling Like Leaves looks super cute, but I'm not the best with rom-coms, and I do want to read Lynn Painter first before moving onto any of these other romances that currently aren't on my TBR. Of course, Dustin Tao has been all over my feed since his debut, so I've definitely heard of You Found Oliver, but I do first want to read You've Reached Sam before reading any of his other books. I haven't heard of When Devils Sing, and nobody in particular very much reminds me of Sonora Reyes's book. And I'm also not familiar with A First Time for Everything, which from this description does sound like a really cute summer romance. Perhaps I'll add it for next year. The Thrashers, I also haven't heard a ton of, but I do know of Julie Soto. And then I have watched some video podcast of Tiffany D. Jackson talking about The Scammer and then some of the truths behind the plot, which is interesting, but it is a thriller. And so, yes, it's a thriller. And so I unfortunately cannot handle thrillers. I have seen Dating Dragons pop up on my feed, even though I'm not familiar with Christy Boyce's work, but the cover is very much giving me Ali Hazelwood. I know of Adam Silvera because They Both Die at the End is also on my TBR, and I'll consider, I think, reading the sequel once I've read book one. We Fell Apart. I have watched an hour-long review of that book, so I actually feel satisfied enough not to read it for myself. I also haven't read We Were Liars, even though I know that book is super popular and I think was also turned into a show. Say a Little Prayer very much gives me Mandy Moore vibes. And then we have, last but not least, Audrey and Bash are just friends. And I think that this cover is super adorable. So going back up, I would like to say that in my top 10, and again, in no particular order, I think that we will definitely have Fake Skating. I also do think that I Am Not Jessica Chen will make it to the top 10 list. I'm also choosing Needy Little Things. I do also think that Glorious Rivals, I think Glorious Rivals could make it into the top 10. I also feel that the coziness of Falling Like Leaves will push it into the top 10. And then, of course, definitely You Found Oliver as well. And I think maybe The Scammer, maybe The Dating. Okay, I'm definitely going to choose The Survivor Wants to Die at the end, as well as We Fell Apart, because it's just so popular. I think I might actually just choose Sisters in the Wind. Definitely I Am Not Jessica Chen. I think I'm going to choose Sisters in the Wind for this one. And then I definitely need to cast my vote. I'm going to cast my vote for Needy Little Things. I also think maybe Wish You Were Here. And of course, now I've completely forgotten Count, but I'm going to go ahead and cast my vote for Needy Little Things. And I do think that Fake Skating by Lynn Painter will be the winner. Yeah, I think that was 10. Hopefully you were counting for me. I know that Goodreads is a different kind of list, but I do think it is interesting to note that none of the nominees for the young adult category in the National Book Award ended up being on this list, especially since The Teacher of Nomadland was recently announced as the National Book Award winner, and I imagine that it has gotten so much buzz after its publication this year, and not to see it on this list. I think I'm going to do some research as to whether there is any correlation between things like Goodreads and any other major children's awards like the National Book Awards, also like the Coretta Scott King Awards, and then also thinking of the Bell Prey Awards as well. If you would like to see that video sooner rather than later, feel free to let me know. Also, that'll help me figure out whether that's just my own interest or if there's actual interest in thinking about what kind of books make it on popular lists like Goodreads versus the kinds of books that actually win really kind of top literary awards in the industry. And so if you've read any of the books on the Goodreads list, feel free to let me know in the comments below. I want to know who you voted for. I want to know who you think will be the winners. I want to know who you think, whether these nominees or if anyone got snubbed on the list. And so until the next video, I want to thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.